Very good. Thank you to everyone joining us here today for the release of the new Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative Policy Brief entitled Diversity in the Darkness, Effective Marine Protection Requires More Knowledge About Species. It's available online, and I will post the link to the full policy brief in the chat box on YouTube. And I'd like to note for journalists who have joined us online that questions may be posted at any time via the chat box on the YouTube webcast. And I'd now like to welcome oceanographer Anna Metaxas of Dalhousie University for some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you everybody for coming to this press release. I am here representing the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, who on behalf of the producers of the policy brief that I'll talk about today is doing this presentation for you. So the policy brief was actually prepared by the Senckenberg Institute for Research in Germany. And it has a number of authors, and I would like to take a moment to go through those names. Dr. Stephanie Kaiser is the lead. Other authors are Julia Sigwart, Eden Niemeyer, Hania Saidi, Chong Chen, Anna Hilario, Tammy Horton, Carrie Howell, Lisa Levin, Karen Osborne, and Angelica Brandt. So a couple of things to note. There's a lot of authors, and there's a reason for that, and it is part of the messaging of this brief. The other thing to note is these authors are from all over the world. So although many of them are from the Senckenberg Institute, there's also authors from JAMSTEC, from Japan Agency for Marine Science and Technology, University of Southampton, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and University of Aveiro, and the Smithsonian Institute in the United States. So again, what this indicates is the complexity of the issue and the number of experts that it takes to produce a policy brief such as the one that I will talk to you a little bit today. So the topic is diving through the darkness, and the message is that we need species information for effective marine conservation of the deep ocean. So why do we care about the deep ocean? Well, the deep ocean is massive. It comprises more than 95% of our habitable part of our planet, almost 2/3 of the surface of our planet. It has many, many functions. It helps regulate climate. It helps regulate nutrients. And it actually is not way out there. The deep ocean is part of exclusive economic zones. And in fact, almost 70% of exclusive economic zones occur at depths greater than 200 meters. So in the context of the CBD, it is very much an issue, a part of many, many nations' land or estate. And so there are a few messages that this policy brief specifically addresses. The first one is, as I said, the deep sea is the largest realm on Earth, but it's also a center for biodiversity. And it is estimated that there's approximately 2 million species living in the world's oceans. Many, many of them live in the deep sea. However, only 28,000 of them have actually been described. And as a matter of fact, every time we collect material samples from the deep sea, approximately 90% of the species that we collect remain unknown. And so this is the second message of this brief, is that most of these deep species are undiscovered and they remain unknown. But these are the species that carry on all of the functions that the deep sea does for us. They are the ones that cycle the carbon. They are the ones that bury the carbon into the sediment to not come back and emerge into our atmospheres as carbon dioxide. They are the ones that do all the work, yet we don't even know who they are. They don't actually have names. And so what the brief suggests is that if we are going to start impacting the deep sea, we're going to be starting to lose species that we don't even know exist yet, and we don't even know what their role is. And in fact, the pressures, the drivers of habitat, of biodiversity and habitat loss that we see on land and in coastal systems also are present in the deep sea. Climate change is having an impact on the deep sea. The deep sea is warming, it's becoming more acidic, and so organisms that have shells cannot keep their shells, the shells will dissolve. And it's also subject to a lot of anthropogenic pressures. Of course, deep sea fisheries have had a major impact on deep sea ecosystems. Trawling is a major destructive agent of deep sea ecosystems, particularly vulnerable marine ecosystems like deep water corals, and extractive industries other than fishing, but oil and gas, and in particular we hear a lot about the potential for deep sea mining, are also going to have an impact on deep sea biodiversity. So then this brief calls for sort of call for describing our diversity of species in the deep sea so that we can better protect them, and that this protection is essential if we are actually going to keep our planet healthy, because the deep sea provides so many services. So I will stop there, and I'll be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Anna. So, are there any questions from the floor?
Hi, Alex Schills from Le Devoir newspaper. About the deep sea exploration mining, are you afraid that there will be like a green light from the international community for new projects, the first projects, in fact, in the next month, maybe in 2023?
There is not much that can be regulated within national jurisdictions in terms of who proceeds with deep sea mining. Deep sea mining is not imminent technologically, but what is important is that the regulations need to be in place. And as you're probably familiar, the International Seabed Authority is trying to implement, develop, and try to implement regulations for the exploitation and deep sea mining in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And there has been a call by many scientific communities and other society, members of society, and many nations, in fact, France, for example, Germany, that is calling for a pause on how we proceed with deep sea mining because of a lack of understanding, knowledge of the deep sea ecosystems. And if we don't know who lives there, we can't possibly imagine how they will be affected.
Great. I think we had another question over here.
Hi, Anna. I wondered, would it worry you if we came away from COP15 with anything less than 30 by 30?
The 30 by 30 question. Will I be worried? I would be worried if we came out of COP without an ambitious framework. The 30 by 30 is one of the possible ways forward. It works in a lot of places, and in some places it may not work. Certainly for the deep sea, a 30 by 30 would be desirable, and the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative supports a 30 by 30. But a 30 by 30 that is not enforced is no good. A 30 by 30 that it's a paper park is also no good. And importantly, a 30 by 30 does not mean that then we should go have free access to the rest of the ocean and do whatever we want to do with it. And so there's other elements of this framework that are also very important, the sustainable management of the entire planet, so of all ocean. So yes, 30 by 30 is great and it works in some places, but it should not give us permission to then go outside that 30 and act as if all is good, because it's the sustainable management of the entire ocean that would be appropriate in my mind. Thank you.
Great. I think there's a question here.
Hi. Would you have studied the impact of pollution in deep sea bed, like plastic pollution and the other kinds of pollution, like how it impacts underwater, especially the deep sea?
So that's a very good question, and it is pollution. So the deep sea is very large, right? So the deep sea starts as close to just off the continental shelves, and it extends all the way down to 11 kilometers depth. So pollution, the impact of pollution at this point very much depends on what depth you're at. So we know that off the continental shelves, there is a lot of pollution. There's a lot of abandoned ghost fishing gear that is harming the environments, the habitats, ecosystems there. We know that the deep ocean has been used as a dumping ground for a long time for nuclear waste, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I think it was 2 or 3 years back now that they found barrels of nuclear waste off California leaking. But we also are seeing plastics in deep sea organisms. And so our plastic problem is extending into the deep sea, the very deep sea. I wouldn't call it a major problem right now, only because there are bigger problems that we have. But it certainly reaches the depths of great depths of several kilometers.
Just a quick question. What do you think current CBD negotiations can achieve deep sea protection-wise?
As I mentioned earlier, I think what the CBD can do for our planet is also going to be what it can do for the deep sea. Our planet is a blue planet. Most of the blue is deep sea. And so I think that the ramifications are that what we come out of COP with is going to be very, very much relevant to the deep sea. The deep sea is arguably one of the last remaining pristine, relatively pristine habitats on our planet. We haven't managed to impact it as much as others. And so it will be particularly important that we pay attention and the outcomes of COP are how they're applied to the deep sea. Currently, the marine environment, and more even so the deep ocean, is almost an afterthought, I find, in the process. Most of the process is based on land, terrestrial environments, both in terms of impacts and how we're going to protect and what kind of indicators we're going to use to assess the success of our targets or meeting our targets. And so it is very much an afterthought, and that worries me, because it is the system that regulates our planet, the health of our planet. And so we need to keep it at the forefront.
I think we have a question here.
Hello, hi. I have a question about how do you think the fishing risk should be regulated to protect the deep oceans, species? Thank you.
So the fisheries, deep sea fisheries, are really a dangerous thing to do, activity. Fish that live in the deep ocean they grow to be very old. They grow very slowly. It's just the conditions. It's very cold, and so it takes a lot of time for them to reach maturity, to become reproductive, to produce young. And so it's those kinds of characteristics that make them very, very vulnerable to any sort of disturbance. So if we start fishing and we, regulated or unregulated, it takes a long time for them to recover. So I would say that deep sea fisheries probably should be not pursued at this point, because I cannot see how they can be sustainable and at the same time have any economic feasibility. It just takes too long to replenish the populations of deep sea fish.
Sir.
Good day. Kim Friedman from FAO. We had an interesting fisheries side event yesterday, and one of the questions that came up was that under IEG 6, we had 4 very clear deliverables that were required of fisheries to respond to society's wish for biodiversity conservation in that sector. How do you feel the clarity is for fisheries to look at the current emerging GBF and see what is required from fisheries in biodiversity conservation and mainstreaming? Thank you.
So the FAO is I don't know if you were at the Marine Conservation of Marine Coastal Biodiversity session yesterday evening. So fisheries specifically in terms of the deep sea are not really, I think, showing up in the GBF. I don't think it's the same problem as with other issues of the marine environment. I just think that there isn't enough in the GBF about deep sea, whether it's fisheries or whether it's any other aspect of it. I mean, we saw the deep sea mining discussion yesterday that came up, and even there, there's a lot of disagreement. Who knows what's going to happen with that part of the agreement. And so I am concerned. I'm concerned because I don't think there's enough attention and then enough to those processes.
Question over here.
There was, recent discussion on this one fish. I think it's called the tan bristlemouth, which is a mesopelagic fish, and it said that it's going to be. It is possibly the most abundant fish by biomass, and the future of seafood kind of rests here since our continental shelf is depleted. But like you rightly pointed out about the whole life history of deep sea fish, being one of risk. In your policy brief, have you all sort of made any recommendations on the future of those fisheries? Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other industry that's going to be taking off sooner or later, particularly in the South Asian Bay of Bengal region. But I just wanted your thoughts on that, please.
So our policy brief does not really address fisheries per se. It does address biodiversity, species diversity. And the mesopelagic is actually one of the, bathypelagic are some of the least understood realms of the marine environment, the deep sea environment. And so, and the briefs, I guess, point stands in that just for any other species, we also don't know about the fish. And so that it is that lack of knowledge of the species and their life cycles that sort of is being addressed in this brief, and basically asking for support to be able to gain more information so that we can make decisions and have these conversations about what is feasible, what is not feasible. But the fact remains that we actually do not know a lot about even fish in the mesopelagic and the bathypelagic.
Sir.
Thank you. Tetsujija from Kyoto News. Do you think that UN negotiation of BBNJ and the UNCLOS will help the conservation of marine deep sea biodiversity? And how do you see the current negotiation of BBNJ going on?
Well, it is our hope that the BBNJ negotiations will help with the conservation of the deep sea. There are the areas beyond national jurisdiction, and that includes not only the surface but also the water, the deep water, and the seabed communities. So the elements in the BBNJ are very important. They do discuss, of course, area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, and capacity building, which is another issue that, of course, is a big issue, particularly with the deep sea expertise and technology development. And so, yeah, we're all looking to February, and hopefully we can have a successful completion of that agreement. Of course, the big challenge is then what? Then we have a very large ocean that we need to think about how we will most effectively set up all those, deliver all those aspirations of the BBNJ agreement. So that's a tough job, but we have to do it.
Great. I think we have about 2 more minutes to, we have time for one more question. Tetsuji, do you have a follow-up?
It's a follow-up from the BBNJ question.
Oh, okay.
Are there
Yes, please.
any challenges that you foresee in terms of negotiating? Because it's a no man's zone, right? Like who will control the territory and what's the mechanism out there for regulating open seas? So yeah, I'm just wondering about that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is the big issue, and of course, there's many different interests, and I think we can see a little bit of that playing out in the International Seabed Authority, which only deals with resources in the deep seabed, mining specifically, and we can see what a challenge it has been to come up with strong, effective, meaningful regulations for potential exploitation, and that has taken a long time. So. The big challenge is, as you point out, the delivery of that agreement. We can have agreements, but then, it is going to be a massive challenge. And I think exactly for the reasons that you state, that it's beyond national jurisdiction. And so who's going to enforce? How are they going to enforce it? It's going to be the big problem. And in my mind, access equitable governance, access by the developing nations, developed nations. That is going to be a big issue that we really must face. Yeah.
Thank you very much, especially Anne, for your taking part in this news conference, and thanks for everybody who has joined us here and online.
Thank you very much.